Americans for Safe Access is celebrating our 23rd anniversary. For over 2 decades, we've brought medical cannabis stakeholders together to meet the immediate needs of patients while addressing knowledge, policy, and regulatory gaps, clearing the way for a national medical cannabis framework that serves all patients. What you may not know is that ASA has been women-led ever since I founded the organization in 2002. So for our 23rd anniversary, I've created this series where I've interviewed women who have taught me everything I know about medical cannabis. I'm honored to present the women who crush, the women who get shit done. Many of you may know my next guest from her popular podcast, Planted with Sara Payan. I know Sara as a fierce patient advocate. Join us. We talk about her journey as a medical cannabis patient, advocate, and now a podcast host. Hi, Sara.
Hi, Steph. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to see you. It's been forever.
I know. It's good to see you too. Thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
This is great. This has been definitely a very fun project, and I'm enjoying getting to spend this much time with all my favorite ladies. So thank you. I know you're super busy. I'm always excited to get a little bit of your time. So let's just jump in. I'm going to start off with sort of the question I've been starting all these conversations with, which is, how did you find your way into this crazy world of cannabis, girl?
Man, I tell you, if you had told me 15 years ago I would be doing this, I'd tell you you were nuts. My background is in nonprofit,
Mhm.
and I worked in civil rights and also um, financial justice. And when I was in my late 30s, I had stage 3 colon cancer. So that was when I got my medical card. And that's not to say that I didn't enjoy cannabis before that. I certainly did, but I really saw the impact of how it's used medicinally when I was sick. My mom has since retired, but she's a hematology oncology nurse and a cancer researcher who did the clinical trials of the chemo regimen that I ended up having to take. And it was because of her that I knew that THC was going to be good for nausea and for helping getting me eating again. One of the additional perks that I found through that was that some of the drugs that I would be taking, because I had a resectioning of my colon and 12 rounds of Fulfox 5, was that instead of having to use opiates for pain and anti-nausea drugs, I was able to use cannabis in lieu of that because those drugs have side effects that are they can be really constipating. And for
Yeah,
most people, that's just kind of an inconvenience. But when you have stage 3 colon cancer, it can actually kill you.
yeah,
So being able to not do that was great. And I'll tell you, I mean, to be honest, I was super excited to go inside a dispensary because before that it was just, your guy or
right.
your girl, and you got what you got. They couldn't tell you much about it. But all of a sudden, there was a whole bunch of things that I could choose from and experiment with to see what would give me relief. And this was before we were even talking about CBD or any of the other, emerging cannabinoids. So there was a lot of trial and error. But before I got my card and before I knew that I was sick, I was getting sick when I was eating. I was getting every time I would eat, I would get really bad cramping and
Mhm.
cyclical vomiting that would last for hours. And I went to go see gastroenterologist, and they were like, "Well, you have IBS. So here are some smooth muscle relaxants. They won't make you feel groovy. They're just gonna calm down your organs. See if this works. I'll see you when you're 50." And I was like, "Well, you're gonna see me when I'm 40 because my great grandma died of colon cancer a year before I was born, so it runs in my family." So I was, kind of foreshadowing, had no idea.
Right.
Um, but the smooth muscle relaxant stopped working. And a friend of mine had cannabis and was like, "Hey, can I give you a couple grams and will you see if this works? Try it before you eat." And it did. I wasn't getting sick. I was actually able to eat. And because I was so afraid of eating, I would just be miserable laying on the floor. So fast forward to getting my resectioning of my colon, finding out that I was stage 3, you're going to do 12 rounds of chemo, girl. I was like, okay, I'm getting my card. I'm going to try this. And I did make some mistakes along the way. Like I had this exceptionally strong cannabis beverage. Um, back in the day, they weren't very tasty and they were really strong. And my first conversation with my oncologist about chemo, I showed up and all of a sudden I was just so sky high. I was like, Kevin, I can't for this. I got to go home. And he's like, on your own time, let's do this. So that was kind of the first indication to me that we needed to have more conversations about how to figure out that safe container for experimentation for patients. Um, because, I looked a lot different than I do now. When I was going into the dispensary, they were lovely, but they were also afraid to give me any sort of guidance. And so when I started working in the industry, part of it was also about not behaving as a healthcare provider, but how to be a navigator so that you could help people make decisions for themselves. And when I was a year out of chemo, I decided that I didn't want to go back into the office uh,
Mhm.
because part of me thought, the stress of office life may have contributed to me getting sick.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
so I went back to school for my master's in org psych. And during that time, well, towards the end of chemo, a new dispensary had opened. I'd become friends with the executive director, and he was like, "Hey, are you looking for a job?" And I thought, "Wow, yeah, I can promise you 4 years." I've never, when at the first time I went to college, I was working a serious office job, and I thought this will be like working at a bookstore or a music shop. It'll be fun, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, yeah.
So it changed my whole view. Like, to be able to spend an entire day in a dispensary and see people from all walks of life coming in and how it was benefiting them and having the conversations and being able to help people navigate the menu who may be coming in on the worst days of their lives.
Mm.
And I gotta say that it was also really healing for me to be able to help people that were going through things that weren't dissimilar to what I had been through not too long ago. But I also, being that I was coming from when I worked in civil rights, I was not going out and doing the good work. I was keeping the lights on
Right.
for my colleagues to do their work. And so I was creating systems and programs around training and coaching and mentoring, especially for staff that were looking to get into management. And so I looked at this as an opportunity to create a training program that would better equip people behind the bar for helping patients navigate the menu,
Yeah.
giving them information to bring back to their physicians so they could have conversations. Because if you remember, these were the days where you get recommendations for using cannabis medicinally, but sometimes the physicians would be very frightened to verify those recommendations. So you
Yep.
kind of have to talk them into it. And we were still having, part of the training was, if the feds come, this is what you do,
Yep.
So we were
Yeah.
still doing that too.
Yeah, yeah.
But then on top of that, we're getting into this new era of how do we be navigators without being practicing medicine?
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, and how do we have these soft skills to hold space for people who may be coming in on not only a hard day, but maybe the worst day of their life? So that was what I started to do, and I became the director of education for the dispensary. And as far as I know, and this is just trivia, I was told that I was the first director of education for any dispensary in the world because there hadn't been anything like that yet. Not that there weren't knowledgeable people sharing their information and training, but I was the first person to have that title. And then I went forward and started doing outward education with the public. So I became the public education officer, and my first class was cannabis and cancer. And we started with that, and then it was Cannabis 101, the non-euphorics,
Right.
getting into anxiety, sleep, all these things till I had 7 classes, and we would do them in person. And that's when a lot of the healthcare institutions started getting interested, and I started doing trainings for, um, the palliative care pharmacology students at UCSF and some other UCSF staff, and going to Kaiser and lecturing. And then I created the first curriculum for City College San Francisco. And so I started doing a lot of educational work and outreach outside of the dispensary. And at that time, we were starting to look at legalization. So I got back to my policy roots and I became the co-chair of the legalization task force in San Francisco. And my colleagues and I made significant changes. I don't think people understand like the power of grassroots work and how
Yeah.
much make it a local level.
Yeah, and having just being there at the table, the just going back to the time of the federal raids, a lot of the first work that we did at America's Safe Access was, training people who worked in dispensaries and in cultivation sites. I'm sure you probably went to one of our Know Your Rights trainings where we're like, did the role plays with people, pretending to be police, and it really changed how enforcement would work because when a raid is really just it's a dynamic entry search warrant, meaning that they actually can't arrest someone yet. They're there to find more information. And when every single person that they interviewed said, I choose to remain silent, I want to speak to my attorney, right? They weren't getting more information. And, a lot of that meant, was happening within, like we would do those trainings. I think we trained like over 200,000 people with that training. But it also meant reinforcing it. And so having people like yourself within the facility, making sure everybody knew the plan, knew what to do. And then on the outside of that was the raid response program where, every time there was a raid, we had a day of protests. And we were like, oh gosh, sometimes they were like, every single day it felt like. I think during there'd been like a total of about 500 raids since 1996, and we had same day protests on about 380 of those. So was I slept with my cell phone next to my head until we passed the CJS amendment because like I was ground zero to set those off. But yeah, the other part of that was part of it was just preparing and dealing with the feds, but also just explaining to Californians what we were doing, right? Like we're not just, selling drugs here. Like let me explain Cannabis 101 to you. So I love that you sort of took that information that you were using on a very personal level to then helping others to then informing. And it's such a huge undertaking and also just such a common theme I'm finding in the cannabis space. It's like people like this works. I've got to tell everyone.
Yeah.
And it really has made it be a permanent fixture in places like California.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to talk about too is that it's nuanced. Like I always like to say conversation is normalization. And one of the biggest things I had moved my classes from being in person to Zoom. So I was getting like over 200 people from around the world attending. So they may not be purchasing their cannabis in California, but they were looking for information
Mhm.
and letting them know that your mileage may vary. We are walking chemistry experiments. It's all very different, and it's very human to have something not work for you and for you to think it's not good for anybody else. So really talking to them about the fact that, we create our own endogenous cannabinoids, but you may not tolerate phytocannabinoids. And guess what? That's okay, because
Yeah.
I have over 20,000 hours of experience with human beings and cannabis, and I've seen everything from what you and I would see as, "Oh, well, that is a very normal response to that dosage," to, "Really? You felt like you were tripping on a high ratio of CBD to THC?" But instead of invalidating that, you lean in and
Right.
like, ask questions and then when you talk to researchers about it, they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there are people who have sensitivities, and this is what we found." And as we start to have more people using it, we're gonna get more reports back on what we may have thought of as anomalies, but now we're just looking at as the various ways that we can respond. So how do we create that safe container for experimentation to empower people to safely try it, but then to also understand that if it doesn't quite work for them, there are other plant medicine alternatives like adaptogens and other things that they can explore as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think, something you said that I think is so important is, and I don't know if everybody who works in a dispensary understands this, but when a patient walks in, they may know nothing about cannabis. So they're going to remember every single word that the person behind that counter tells them, and they're going to see it as like, the Bible, right? Because ultimately is much more than they can imagine, right? Than they do. And so one of the I think sort of dangers in trying to be helpful is that sometimes people give too much information or maybe try to be their physician, and instead of just saying, hey, I like, the way that you said it, I'm going to help you navigate through this exploration, and try to start in a place that your brains won't fall out, right? Because it's so much information to be like, wait, what? I've got what in my body?
Yeah, that's it. Well, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'd have people who would come in, dump a bunch of products in front of me and be like, "I don't know, Sarah, it's just not working." But there was no what it was, creating some sort of format for them to be mindful and report back, which seems like something that would be common sense,
Right.
but if you're nervous about using it anyway, or, word of mouth is really strong, the conversations that we have with friends and family, like you have somebody who says these chocolate covered blueberries help me sleep. You're assuming it's going to help you. And when it doesn't, you're really frustrated
Yeah.
and you don't really think about what's happening. So to create like a format for people to go by, like I would tell them, do a mind and body scan. How are you feeling today?
Right.
And for women, I mean, men go through hormonal things too, but for women, when we ovulate, we're more sensitive to THC. When we menstruate, we're less sensitive. Like, think of where you are in your cycle. What's going on with your stress levels? What other pharmaceuticals are you taking?
Yeah.
Like,
What
and
are
then
you eating? Are you sleeping? Yeah, all of these
all that.
components. Yeah, we
And
have
then
always used like a journal for people, just to like log what they're taking. But some of the questions I where people are like, why are you asking me the environment? I was like, because it matters, right?
all those weird chemicals in our brains fire off by, the stimulus in our environment. And stuff, it's one of those things where I think it's indicative of the fact that, in this crazy world that we live in, where we're bombarded by so much stimuli and
Mhm.
we're so in our heads that we forget about where we are with our bodies. Like we're not as grounded as we should be. And so I think cannabis is a really excellent opportunity to get back in touch with our bodies and ground and know that everything we put in our bodies creates a reaction.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people I've been interviewing. There's like a gateway analogy, right? That cannabis is a gateway to understanding biology. It's a gateway to understanding other herbal medicines. And I think the fact that cannabis and our endocannabinoid system are really about balance and about structure. It's almost like cannabis is coming into our society at this level at the right time.
Yeah, it's also a gateway to civic engagement and critical thought. Not all things that are illegal are bad. Not all things that are legal are necessarily good.
Right. I love that. Yeah. I think for a lot of advocates, who we were talking about this earlier, who feel really frustrated that like patients are getting sidelined, which is a reality. But there's also, I'm seeing a lot of those patients not engaging anymore and actually being, at the table. On one side, I think people need to remember that, patients, we don't need anybody to do something for us. We want people to do it with us, which means you just have to make sure we're at the table. Uh, And I think one of the things maybe not that many people know about you has been your role in the commission, that actually talking about showing up. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that work, the joys and long hours.
Yeah, this is my second term on the California Advisory Committee, and this term I am vice chair. And it's a very different thing than working locally,
Mhm.
because there are as the co-chair of the legalization task force, or even when I was on oversight committee in San Francisco, we had direct access to the supervisors. So we
Mhm.
could make recommendations about policy that they would adopt. And we were able to make change that was impactful and done much quicker.
Right.
When you get to the state level and then when you get to the federal level, there's just so many more people involved and so many more layers.
Right.
So we're having conversations where we're making recommendations to the Department of Cannabis Control, or the DCC. And though impactful, it is much slower moving. But and I should say, it's also really important that even if you're not on the committee and you have strong feelings, that you attend these meetings and speak up in public comment and write letters, because we do listen and we are reading these letters and we are taking this into consideration when we're making recommendations. And there are some things that may not be in the DCC's purview, but still need to be heard and need to be said. And it is really up to the public, whether you are a part of the industry and movement or you're a concerned citizen, that you come out and you speak about it. But we have a lot of things that we're covering this year. Um, you know, I'm still really pushing for us to have more conversations about medicinal use in the patients, creating more change in the state card system, because there's a lot of talk about they aren't making changes because it's not being utilized as much. Well, it's not being utilized as much because people don't understand that it still exists and understand what the benefits are.
Yeah.
And in areas like San Francisco, it's still expensive to get your card. Like if you're on Medi-Cal or Medicare, it's $50, but in other counties, it's free. And San Francisco doesn't give it for free because they say that healthy San Francisco is enough. And I'm sorry, it's not. And we
Yeah.
need
Thank
to
you for
create,
saying that. Yeah.
yeah, we need to create better access for having people be able to do it online, because we are no longer in an environment where we have to worry about somebody getting a card just to get access to cannabis.
Right. Right. No,
So
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think that what a lot of people don't understand is that, there are people listening, but for every complaint that you make to a friend or, fire off on Facebook, you should be writing at least one letter to a person who has the power to change that.
it's true, because we can do things on committees, but what makes the most impact are the people who are creating these policies. The DCC doesn't create these policies. The legislature does. And the DCC's job is to implement these. The legislature, these people in the legislature depend on your vote for their jobs, and they still have an outdated view of who you, the cannabis user or the cannabis patient, is. So it's time to come out of the closet and contact your representatives and let them know that you contribute to society, you pay taxes, you use cannabis, and you vote. And that's what's going to make the biggest difference of all. And when you come to these meetings and you hear public comment, it may spark more curiosity or remind you of things that you also have issues with. You won't feel so alone. There's a lot to be said about joining in with other members of the public to use your voice to say something, because if they know that their jobs are on the line, they're going to take more notice, because there are two things that take an elected official's notice: their jobs and money.
No, no, well said, well said. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me, even with your cold. I appreciate you
I'm sorry, I'm a
taking
little
the time.
grumpy.
No, no, it's just great to see you. And I'll just wrap up by giving you the floor if there's any last words you'd like to leave us with today.
I just think that, if you're in the industry and you're a woman in the industry, just find mentors, connect with other women, connect with good people. There are so many people out there that are looking to work together to help, to mentor. It's a difficult time in the industry, but don't give up. Don't give up. And for patients out there who are frustrated, your voices are incredibly important. Get out there. If you can't do the lobby days, write letters, but be heard. Because if we don't have a seat at the table, we are definitely on the menu. And in this crazy world where people are fighting and we're getting upset with one another about different things that are going on, what we can do is be kind to one another, make an impact locally, connect with your community, support them, they'll support you. Just be good to one another. And it's just been really great spending time with you, Steph.
Yay. Thank you, dear.
Absolutely.